The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
A very warm welcome to Squawk Box Europe. I'm Steve Sedgwick with Karen Cho and Juliana Tattelbaum, and these are your headlines. Chinese President Xi Jinping outlines his vision for a new global bloc as he hosts world leaders including Russia's Vladimir Putin and India's Narendra Modi, telling delegates China aims to capitalize on turbulence caused by the Trump administration.
The international landscape is marked by intertwined changes and turbulence, and member states face increasingly arduous tasks in ensuring security and development. China is willing to work with all parties to take this meeting as an opportunity.
A US appeals court rules that most of President Trump's global tariffs are illegal, dealing a blow to his trade policies and creating uncertainty for partners across the globe.
And Alibaba shares jump as AI-related sales surge, driving a strong quarter for its cloud division. As sources tell CNBC, it's working on a new AI-focused chip.
Well, a very good morning. Welcome back, Karen. I hope you enjoyed your rest as well.
Thank
I mean,
you.
it does feel like we're virtually back to school, apart from for Americans who have got Labor Day today. So enjoy your Labor Day, America. But the fact of the matter is, it couldn't be more exciting in the world at the moment. The markets, I thought, were pretty relaxed at the end of last week, despite the fact that the Fed's preferred measure of inflation, still at its highest level since February, doesn't seem to have moved the needle on the rate cut decision. I think it's going to be a rate cut, isn't it? Unless something dramatic changes on the 16th and 17th of September as well. So there's a lot to play for. And of course, it is payroll week.
Yeah, jobs. For me, that's all I read all weekend. That's the crack that is starting to emerge in the US economy. If we see a jobs report later this week suggesting that, look, the momentum really is coming out of the employment market, then it is a firm signal for the Federal Reserve to get going on those rate cuts. I think that is highly significant because we've been in the last party on the markets for a while. Nobody wants to leave the party early, and the prospect of rate reductions from here has really set the scene for an extension of that party.
Well, then you got the geopolitics as well, with everything that's gone on in China over the weekend. Fascinating relations between the Chinese, Indian leaders, President Putin as well. We'll talk about all of that now, but clearly there's a lot going on from markets perspective as well as geopol.
Yeah, just a quick word on the markets. I said they were pretty relaxed at the tail end of last week on the back of that probably mildly disappointing data, the fact that it was in line or slightly higher depending on which measure you were. But by and large, the US markets were absolutely solid last week, apart from one market. Dow was up 3%, S&P was up a couple of percent, NASDAQ was also up as well. Energy had a tough week as well. But I beg pardon, I'm looking at the month-to-date move, by the way. On the month, actually, it was really, really solid move for the month of August. And on the month, actually, European equities fell a little bit. But what happened last week on the back of that data, we saw a little bit of a crack in crypto. And I didn't understand why people were so relaxed about the data by and large, but are now blaming the PCE for crypto coming off fairly aggressively from its recent highs.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few momentum trades that are coming unstuck. And if you look at
trades.
Well, if you look at the European markets, you could throw that into the same bucket as well. It's quite a decent reversal last week. I mean, French stocks down more than 3%, and the German stock market close to 2%. So there is a little bit of a fade in parts of the market.
Yeah, and what is very interesting, you talk about momentum trades. One trade that we don't talk about very much. Has anyone been looking at silver? I started looking at silver and doing a bit more work on revisiting gold-silver ratios. Maybe silver is having a bit of a breakout at the moment, and just very interesting to have a look at it for our viewers who don't normally look at that one as well. We talk about gold a lot, we talk about crypto,
gold, yeah.
But silver having a stunning breakout. Let us move on back to those geopolitical matters that we mentioned in the heads. The Chinese President Xi Jinping is hosting leaders from more than 20 nations, including Russia, India and Iran, at the largest Shanghai Cooperation Organisation summit to date. Addressing the meeting this morning, Xi rejected what he called a Cold War mentality. Mr. Xi has also held meetings with several leaders on the sidelines of the summit, including the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, with the nations pledging to be partners, not rivals. Well, Elaine joins us from Tianjin in China as well. Elaine, absolutely fascinating. Of course, whether they say overtly or not, it is the moves from the United States and how they are sending tremors throughout the world, which everyone's having to react to. It's just fascinating looking to see how these superpowers react.
It is, Steve, and the timing of the summit cannot be more symbolic given those geopolitical realignments that are happening. And that is not lost on China's president, with Xi Jinping saying the country should seize the moment to take the SCO to the next level. So addressing world leaders this morning, President Xi said the country should advocate for an equal multipolar world and they should support multilateral trading with the WTO at its core. So kind of a veiled reference to the U.S. and its trade war here. But let's take a listen to what he said at the speech.
At present, the international landscape is marked by intertwined changes and turbulence, and member states face increasingly arduous tasks in ensuring security and development. China is willing to work with all parties to take this meeting as an opportunity to review experience, draw up the blueprint, and jointly promote the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation in entering a new stage of high-quality development and high-level cooperation, and to build a closer community of shared future for the SCO.
And analysts have also noted that the SCO is expanding from its previous focus more on regional security to economic and investment ties as well. And Xi, at his speech, said the country should use their mega-sized markets to improve trade and investment. So again, a response to the growing protectionism that we have been seeing. And China is also using the summit to continue bolstering its economic influence, saying it will carry out more livelihood projects and to have more grants and more loans to SCO member states. And this is also coming as the U.S. is retreating from that global humanitarian and development funding. So really fascinating to sort of witness these shifting tides in real time, Steve.
Elaine, let me pick up there and ask about the relationship between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping, because it's really fascinating that the Indian Prime Minister has made his way to China for this trip. We know the relationship between China and India has been incredibly contentious over the years, but it sounds like the rhetoric has become significantly more constructive, with Xi telling Modi China was not a threat to India. They're not rivals here. How could we see ties deepen between India and China? What could actually change between the two nations?
Right, so the meeting between Modi and Xi was very closely watched, and it was seen as the most important outcome of this meeting. And as you say, it's coming as the two sides pursue a tactical easing of tensions after a 5-year freeze because of their disputed border. Now, Xi, as you say, said that they are not rivals, they are partners. China represents opportunities, not threats. And Modi said the mutual respect and mutual sensitivity are necessary to the development of these bilateral ties. But with all the emphasis on mutuality, underlying that is really a lopsided economic relationship, specifically India's economic reliance on China for its iPhone components and also for pharmaceutical ingredients for its widely known pharmaceutical industry. And also looming over all that is the Pakistan issue. Pakistan is a member state as well, and CCTV, China's state broadcaster, when Pakistan's leader was arriving, used the hashtag "Our ironclad friend is arriving," and just to highlight the undercurrents geopolitically here. And also underlying this China-India relationship is the unresolved border dispute. And analysts have said the two sides have kind of a different approach to it. Beijing does not want the borders to be at the center of the relationship, whereas India does. So Chinese experts say that they should go for the low-hanging fruits, people-to-people exchanges first. But they do have a long list of challenges ahead.
Elaine, superb coverage, and thank you very much indeed for that. Elaine joining us from Tianjin in China. Right, let us move on, because Chris Weaver joins us now, who is CEO of Macro Advisory. And Chris, we turn to you as one of the great long-term experts on Russia as well. And you made the comment in the copy that I'm looking at that China is the main winner from the continuing conflict in Ukraine and from Trump's actions. Why don't you flesh that out for us? Why is China the winner, sir?
Well, if we look at geopolitics first, I guess the soft message, or if you like, the quiet message that China is delivering to countries in what we call the global south is that the US has become unpredictable, it's become unreliable. It's no longer a country that other countries should rely on in terms of being a trade partner or even being kind of a stable force in the world. Therefore, countries in the global south and BRICS, etc., need to look after themselves. And this is what China says it's offering. It's like an alternative to the G7, to the West, because the West has become, say, unreliable and unstable. And this is what, you mentioned India. Several years ago, we would have said that the relationship between India, excuse me, and China was close to breaking down. It was very adversarial. And now it has completely changed. And one of the reasons it's completely changed, even in the last several weeks, is because President Trump has been targeting India with higher tariffs because it's buying oil from Russia. It has singled out India. It is not targeting other countries that are buying oil from Russia, but it is targeting India. And essentially, Beijing is saying, look, you tried with the West. Now come and let's be friends here in Beijing and work it out. So it's playing into President Xi's hands. And then in terms of the war, yeah, I guess it's more a case of that the Western world, Europe and the US, have been completely preoccupied with the war for the last 3.5 years. If you like, to some extent, that has also helped China to develop its own kind of strategies to move forward, to make relationship, etc., because the US and Europe are distracted with the war in Ukraine. It's left the field a little bit more open for China. So they've been moving forward steadily, subtly, but very resolutely.
Because I think actually there are some subtleties there perhaps that I feel slightly differently about, and that is that most US politicians I speak to and have spoken to over the last couple of years actually say that the US isn't distracted by what's going on in Ukraine. In fact, if anything, it's acting as a metaphor for greater concerns about the Trans-Pacific relationship, about what is going on in that arena as well. So actually, from a lot of the politicians I've spoken to, the Lindsey Grahams of this world, for instance, they are saying, actually, no, what it's done is actually made us more laser focused on what are bigger challenges to come.
Well, yeah, they'll say that, but in practice, that's not what's happening. Because if you like, the US politicians in Congress and the White House have for a very long time been talking about the need for specific actions, build up and other actions in the Pacific area aimed at containing China. But the reality is that while they've been talking about that, and as you say, Senator Graham and others have been saying about US intentions, but nothing has happened on the ground. We do hear occasionally from officials in, for example, in the Pentagon, that they are too stretched there, with Ukraine, with Israel, with a couple of other areas, and they have not followed through with some of their plans for building up, either resources or political actions in the Pacific. There's been a great deal of talk, but really, when you look at what's actually changed on the ground in the last several years, almost nothing.
Chris, it's Karen jumping in. Let me just bring a couple of different threads together. This meeting today, the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation, really is a collection of very interesting countries as we talk about Belarus, India, Iran, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, and others. Countries that may be reliant somewhat on the China factory to floor that we see for the Chinese for many, many years. That's been challenged now with American tariffs. But in one of the statements today about upholding fairness and justice, Xi has been talking about inclusive economic globalization. On the ground in China in recent weeks has been a pushback against overcapacity and trying to tackle what they call a disorderly price-cutting competition. Do you think any of that matters for these handful of countries that are still reliant on Chinese factory production?
Well, yeah, it does, because the China has been taking a greater and growing share of trade with these countries, with Central Asia, and certainly with Russia, of course, as well. You just have to look around the streets and the shops in Moscow now compared to, say, 3 or 4 years ago, and it is very noticeable that there are significantly more made in China brands. A lot of them actually look from a distance, they look exactly the same as the Western brand that they've replaced, but you see that made in China, the Chinese language. The same with cars, etc. So it's happening across the region in Central Asia and the Caucasus and the other SCO states, is that China is being kind of pushing out this excess production. It's not a great safety valve in the sense that these markets are not big enough. They're not big enough compared to, say, Europe or the US. But you are seeing a lot more Chinese goods coming into the SCO markets in general. And I guess to some extent, China is also looking at the Indian market as potentially another big area where it can push some of this excess capacity and more goods in. And for sure, that's happening because China has, again, slowly but steadily become now the biggest investor in most of the countries. It's certainly in Central Asia and a lot of the SCO countries. Again, it's all being done very quietly. You're getting a lot of talk and a lot of intentions from officials in Washington and Brussels. But on the ground, when you look at the numbers, it's the Chinese numbers that are growing without much fanfare, whereas, as I say, the intentions from the West are very clear, but there's not much follow through. Critical minerals is a very good example. Sorry, not to digress, but this is obviously a hot topic and there's been a great deal of discussion on it. And we know that both the US and Europe have been targeting Central Asia as a place for critical minerals. Right. But when you look at what's happening, it's all Chinese investment.
Chris, let me wrap up by asking you about what you think President Trump is trying to do with Russia here. And I ask from the sense that we have seen President Trump indirectly pressure Russia via these higher tariffs on India, but ultimately he could be doing more if he wanted to pressure President Putin more. Why isn't Trump tightening the screws more on Russia and President Putin?
Yeah, look, that's absolutely is the key question because, we can certainly see, well, the Russian economy looks stable or the growth is lower. The budget is actually under a lot of pressure. The budget deficit in the first half this year has been raised to 3.4%. So, if there were to be any more significant sanctions targeting Russian oil trade, for example, from the US, which they've talked about but not done, that would put the budget under greater pressure, certainly more significant pressure. It hasn't happened. Now, one of the reasons, I guess there may be two reasons that might jump out. One is, I guess, the sense that Trump still thinks he can bring both sides to the table, that he can broker a peace deal, and that he can take credit for if you like, for moving the conflict towards peace, and bearing in mind that the announcement on the Nobel Peace Prize will come in early October. It's a factor because we know the character of the individual. The second reason, though, I think it brings us back to what we talked about, which is China. There is a sense that if Russia is defeated, if Russia is completely isolated by the West and has no way back in terms of engaging with the US and Europe, then it has no choice but to go even further all in with China. And that potentially then would strengthen China's position, give it greater access, if you like, to the Arctic, to industrial materials, would effectively have a border with the European Union. And we hear from our discussions in Washington that officials are very conscious of that. They don't want Russia to be essentially a more formal subsidiary of China. They want it to be more in the middle with engagement in the West. So I think that's one reason why they're treading carefully for now. But it's clear also that while Russia's coming under pressure in terms of the budget, it seems clear enough that Washington is starting to lose patience as well. So despite the headlines and despite what's happening on the ground and despite what we see, I'm actually a little bit more optimistic that we will see an end to this in the next couple of months for budget reasons on the Russian side and Trump losing patience on the other side.
Great coverage, Chris. As ever, lovely to see you, sir, and thank you for talking us through that key Russia angle. Chris Weaver, who is CEO of Macro Advisory. And for more on the broader events out of China and the relationship between Russia, India and China, and our coverage from Tianjin, head online to CNBC.com.
Coming up on the show, UK pubs grapple with changes to the April budget, with more than 200 landlords pouring their final pints in the first half of the year. We'll look at the challenges brewing in the industry. Plus, losing charge, Chinese EV maker BYD sees profits slump 30% as an aggressive price war bites into the bottom line. And box office blowout or bust? We get the summer breakdown with the CEO of UK cinema chain View, Tim Richards. That conversation coming up at 9:30 London time.
We have comments crossing this hour from Christine Lagarde over the ECB. Don't forget, there's been a lot of editorial in recent days about who's going to be first towards some sort of IMF bailout, the UK or France, and some calling that overblown. But the comments now today from Christine Lagarde saying French banking system is not a source of risk as of itself, says the French banking system is in better place than the 2008 crisis, and going on in this interview to say that France is not currently in a situation which would need IMF intervention. So ruling that out. And of course, don't forget, Lagarde was previously the head of the IMF, so knows the thinking inside out of that institution. And Lagarde saying, I'm looking very attentively at French bond spread situation. So again, whether there would be any support coming through from the ECB if there happened to be any run on bonds. Not that that is a scenario at this stage, but clearly getting on the front foot. Exactly.
I love listening to your coverage of that and what she's been saying as well, because she's also an ex-French finance minister as well.
Exactly.
So she's
covered all bases.
This is just so, I think, really obvious. This is the boss of the ECB telling the bond market, don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. We've got their back covered. And she may be right that the French banks is a very different situation from 2008. But the fact of the matter is the debt profile is worse. The public spending as a percentage of GDP is on a par with how bad it's been over the last 20 years as well. So, and the deficit situation is as bad as it's been over the last, certainly the last couple of years as well. So I get it. I get that's her job. Her job is to say everything's fine. And by the way, don't even think about it, bond market.
Yeah, I mean, the spotlight has been on the debt situation in many countries. And that spotlight keeps skipping from various different nations, United States, UK, France. So to hit back and in these comments say that fiscal discipline is imperative. We know that is a situation in many countries that they really have to start tackling.
But it's the point I made last week, and I'll just raise it very quickly if I can, because the fact is the French got away with it in the sovereign debt crisis of 2010. The French got away with it because they were never in that dreadful acronym, which I would never mention. The Italians didn't get away with it and have restructured since and actually look fairly strong at the moment, even though they've got high debts. The Irish have had a fantastic economy when they recovered and sorted themselves out. The Spanish, we could make the same argument. The Greeks, as you were talking about, running a primary surplus for a lot of the time as well. So the fact is, the French got away with it then, but because they didn't have to reform and reinvigorate their economy and reinvigorate their spending, actually now is it coming back to haunt them. But anyway, markets.
Well, in terms of markets, just picking up where you guys left off, we did see underperformance in the French market over the course of the month of August. We'll get to the European performance in just a second. In terms of the close on Friday, we saw a pullback across the board, all three of the U.S. majors ending lower, breaking a three-day win streak. The tech-heavy NASDAQ lost more than 1%. The Dow Jones and the S&P also retreated. In terms of the month of August, U.S. markets did gain ground, however. We have seen outperformance of U.S. markets versus European markets, the Dow gaining 3.2%, the outperformer there. And we've been talking a lot about how AI has powered the rally in the U.S., but Steve made the point on Friday that actually we've seen a major rally in the Russell 2000 as well, so small caps have done extremely well. And as you can see there, it's actually the Dow Industrials that have outperformed. It's not the NASDAQ, which is up about 1.6% on the month. Now, compared to Europe, here's where things stood for Europe as of the close of business on Friday. The Xetra DAX and the CAC 40 lost ground in August. We have seen the FTSE 100 and slightly higher, and not on your screens there, but the Italian market outperformed in the month of August. Overall, the Stoxx 600 gaining 0.7% for the month, so paling in comparison to those gains that you saw stateside. Now, in terms of trade today, the first day of September, we are looking at a modestly positive start to trade. Green across the board. The CAC 40 looking to gain about 0.3% alongside the Italian market, which is looking to bounce by about the same.
Important bookmark, Juliana. I forgot it was the 1st of September. I thought we're still in August, but there you go as we count down to year end. Now, UK hospitality sales continued a flat summer of trading according to the latest data out of industry body CGA RSM. Like-for-like July sales in UK pubs rose 0.6%, while sales at bars declined more than 5%. It comes as British pub landlords warn that urgent action is required to cut business rates and VAT in the upcoming autumn budget. Ritika has taken a closer look at Britain's hospitality sector and how pubs have been grappling with higher costs.
The pub is a central part of British culture, social life and the economy. Here at the Devonshire Arms, it's business as usual. But sadly, you don't have to walk too far to see boarded up pubs as trouble brews in the industry.
More than 200 pubs in the UK closed in the first half of the year, official government figures show. That amounts to 8 pubs a week, with London experiencing a significant number of these closures. This comes amid a challenging backdrop for the industry, with increases to the national minimum wage, national insurance contributions and business rates payments. Pubs and breweries are amongst the most heavily taxed business sectors in the UK.
The Devonshire Arms is a quintessential example of a British pub with roots back to the 18th century. But like many other pubs in the area, the rising costs have been passed on to the consumer, with the average price of a pint of beer now around £5.
Tim Skinner, manager at the Devonshire Arms, is grappling with the changes.
It's 3 big increases all coming in at exactly the same time in the April budget. So obviously there's been a lot of cost increases in any case in energy and operating costs over the last few years, but the national insurance increased directly, the business rates increased directly, and obviously maintaining the level of VAT where it is means that a business like this needs to find around £30,000 extra a year just to stay still. So it's a big impact.
So these higher costs that you're facing, are you having to pass them on to the customers?
We are, of course, but it is a little bit of both. So we're having to pass some of those costs on to the customers, but we're very mindful of where we sit in the marketplace. It is still very competitive and we're having to fight for every pound that the customer is willing to spend. So we're trying to make savings where we can, but we're running out of opportunities to do that.
With the industry in decline and numerous closures, British Beer and Pub Association spokesperson Charlie Hall says the knock-on effects to the economy will be significant.
From grain to glass, our sector supports over £30 billion being pushed into the economy, £18 billion in taxes, 1 million jobs. And you can imagine when you've got one pub set to close every week this year, that does have a massive impact on the supply chain, everything from hop farmers, to glass manufacturers.
There are wider calls from the industry for the government to deliver changes in the upcoming autumn budget. Mick Howard, Operations Director of Star Pubs, highlights a need to reform business rates, cut beer duty and avoid any further rises in national insurance contributions.
Investing in tax relief, investing in some of the support pubs needs is an investment in those communities, is an investment in jobs and is an investment in sort of further taxes going into the exchequer. We'd like to see the promised business rates reform. Pubs massively overburdened on their contribution on business rates.
If nothing is done, Mick says more pubs will have to close their doors.
We know that the consumers are still going to pubs. They might go to pubs at different times now. They might go to pubs for different reasons, but they still go and visit their local pub. But without that support, if the cost's still going up, the pubs just won't be able to open the doors.
Ritika Gupta, CNBC International, London.
Ritika is back from the pub and joins us around the studio set. We've been here before, but it's been a long while. We've had the COVID era where you had to almost reserve a spot to get into a pub. But we've come to the point now where people are making decisions about their purse, and one of those decisions can be to buy alcohol, buy beer from a supermarket and stay at home.
Yeah, and it really has been a perfect storm for the hospitality sector. And talking to these pub owners, on the one hand, you have a consumer that is also dealing with high inflation, 3.8%. So maybe not going to bars and restaurants quite as much, maybe going to the supermarket for that. But then at the other side, the higher costs that they're facing, the national insurance contributions, the hike in the national minimum wage. So this is all really pressuring their margins, pressurizing this industry. And this industry, the hospitality sector, employs about 3.5 million people in the UK. So it's a loss there of direct revenues from taxes, employment, and also the broader supply chain. If you looked when we were talking to the pub owner, it's everything from your hops farmers to your glass manufacturers.
To what extent are the challenges being faced by the pubs here in the UK also being driven by changes in consumer preferences? We've been talking so much about the slowdown in alcohol consumption, especially in North America, but to what extent are you seeing the same slowdown in alcohol consumption here?
I think that it's undeniable that is clearly an impact. Younger generation don't drink as much, or they want non-alcoholic beverages, so that is something that they have to deal with on the supply, on the demand side. There's also external cost factors that they might be dealing with, whether it's energy prices or food prices going up. But I think when it comes to job losses, a lot of that still is down to the fiscal policy, is down to what we saw in the budget for Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Because this quick stat is that the UK hospitality, they said that in the hospitality sector, it accounts for more than half of all of the job losses that we've had since the autumn budget. It's about 89,000 in the hospitality sector.
You've made all the brilliant points, but you're right. Habits are changing. I knew it was a lot, but in recent years, for instance, the thirst for hot beverages has not abated, with overall spending on coffee, tea and cocoa nearly doubling between 2010 and 2023. And I challenge anyone out there who lives in the UK to not look at their own high street and see one of the only growth areas on your high street is coffee shops. I mean, so we talked about Costa and the slowdown there and why Coca-Cola might be looking to have some form of exit. But the fact of the matter is, there are still growth areas within hospitality on the high street. It's just not in pubs. And as much as I have deep sympathy for the industry, I know publicans, and it is unbelievably tough. And the Campaign for Real Ale makes the point about how many pubs are closing on a regular basis, vast numbers as well. But there are still an awful lot of pubs around out there. I mean, I live in rural Sussex, and 5 minutes from me in the countryside, you can get to dozens of pubs as well. So I get it, but habits are changing, and we mustn't forget that.
Yeah, and of course, when you have the average price of a pint of beer going above £5, that also has an impact of whether people are going to be going to the pub when they want to have a few savings, perhaps. I think it was.
But why do people go to the pub? I go to the pub now to have a really good meal somewhere. In fact, that's why I go to the pub now. I don't necessarily go to drink beer. And that's a big change because I've done my fair share of my time.
There's also the social economic aspect of it that we don't really talk about as much. It doesn't show up in the GDP figure, but that's a big traditional part of British culture.
To your point, though, I mean, a matcha latte can cost £5 and you sit in a coffee shop with a friend as well, and people are spending that. I mean, I was surprised that there was a shop not far from here that's pretty much what they serve. It's like, how many matcha lattes can you serve?
Well, I think that's a great point. You're not going to sit there and have 5-6 matcha lattes over the course of 2 hours versus at the pub. So the economics are much different for a coffee shop, and that's part of why we're seeing them struggling.
That's why the peanuts are on the counter.
Yes.
Get you thirsty for more beer.
Have there's a big chain in the US.
Who wants to touch those peanuts though?
Well, okay.
There's some very bad statistics about that. We better move on.
In the U.S., there are some that have the shelled peanuts, so it kind of addresses your
still got to touch
issue
the shells.
about sanitation.
Still got to touch the shells. Ritika's great. Thank you very much, Nick. We'll see you a bit later on. Yeah.